Hello, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. And wherever you are in this wide, wonderful, beautiful world, you are very welcome to the Global Sales Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Cooper. I'm the sales relationship coach. What does that mean? Everything that we do in sales, we have to build a relationship with your client and your new clients. And Craig is nodding his head in the background. It is about a relationship. And I like to think that we can get up to that point where we are that trusted advisor, where we're at the top of the top. They call us when they need our help and support. But today, it's not all about me. I wish it was, but now it's all about my special guest on my right. Get that way. We're in audio and we're also in video. So, Craig, you're very welcome.
Jason, thanks for having me. It's so fun to be here with you. I'm excited for this conversation. We're gonna have fun.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have fun. Your name popped up several times when I was working with Google, and I saw a lot of your videos. So I know a lot about you already, which is awesome. That's why I really was so looking forward to having this conversation with you. So, Craig, rather than me talking about you, why don't you give yourself a quick introduction about who you are?
Sure, Jason. And look, thanks for having me. As I said to you in our prep, this is just exciting stuff to talk about, and you and I never get tired of talking about this stuff. So, very quickly, I always say I wear two primary hats. One is I run a company called Sales Engine. It's a 15-year-old company. We're a tools and services firm. And this will not surprise you and your audience, Jason, that believes that sales is the engine of any business. So as simple as that seems, it goes deep, and it goes deep really, really fast. It's been so much fun to work with a whole bunch of my partners and build this company over the last 15 years. So that's my primary hat. And my other primary hat, so I always say I have at least two full-time jobs. I am a clinical professor of marketing at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University in Chicago, so the business school at Northwestern called Kellogg. I've been here for 6 years. I was about a decade before that. I taught as a clinical professor of entrepreneurship for the Booth School of Business, also in Chicago. So I've been lucky to spend about 15 years at two elite top 5 business schools in the world, and it's just super fun. And the last thing I'll mention, and I'll hand it back to you, is what makes the thread that strings those two crazy full-time jobs together is I'm actually a salesperson. I've been a salesperson for 30 years. I started my career covering 13 what we call zip codes on the south side of Chicago for IBM, and never looked back.
Oh, yeah.
I've been in sales ever since.
Yeah, that's a really good foundation working in IBM, because great company.
Great company.
And they're still good today. A lot of my friends work at IBM, and they still they went through a bit of a change, but they're back out at it. And their cloud software and everything that they do now is really good. It's really groundbreaking.
It's a great company. And I always say to people, I am forever thankful to IBM for what they gave me. They gave me a lot. It's a great company.
Yeah. It's pretty similar. Well, I'd say similar to my background. I started my career out of selling digital photocopiers in the city of London.
Fantastic.
So it gave me a massive foundation, but also gave me a little bit of resilience of door knocking. And those days, and you know as well as I do, it was door knocking, and I had a Rolodex that was handed to me, and they go, there you go, and yellow pages.
Yep.
Off you go. Out to the big wide world and get on selling. So
that's right. It's a wonderful foundation. When phone books were actually books, flipping through and just dialing. It was, terrified. I spent most of my time terrified, and then finally at some point I went, wait, I can do this. And then when I really got into it, I thought, you know what? Not only can I do this, I can actually make this fun. And I always say to people when they get into sales, one of the hard stuff you have to do can also be fun. You've got a journey to get there, but you'll get there. Just stick with it.
Yeah. And I think part and parcel of it, if you have a sense of humor behind you, that makes you more likable to the other people, because they can see that you're a likable person. And it's the age-old saying is people like themselves, but they also connect with you really well if you've got a smiley face and your body posture's good, and you do smile a lot, and people like that. You know what it's like when you do smile at someone walking down the street, they smile back at you, they mirror you.
Yeah, they sure do. There's a framing, Jason, that I use when I teach business school students and when we do our consulting work in my sales engine company. And that is we say, great leaders, great people, great parents, great salespeople need to be both bold and humble. And both are true. When you're selling, you're boldly, wading into your territory, wading into that Rolodex or contact list or network or whatever, what a Google Doc, and you're hitting it really hard, and that's bold. And you're setting ambitious goals for you and the client, and that's bold. And in the process of so doing, we also need to be humble, sense of humor, not knowing it all, being the first to say, Jason, if this isn't a fit, not only will I tell you first, but I see it as my responsibility to help you make progress, and I'll connect you with somebody who can do a better job than I can here. I mean, as soon as you say words like that, because it's got to be authentic, got to be from true humility. You are, one of my two favorite words, magnetic. My other favorite word is unstoppable. So boldness is being unstoppable, and humble is being magnetic.
I like trust, connection, and being yourself, and I think a lot of it is really understanding yourself. If you can really truly understand yourself, know your flaws, know the places that you can grow, because we are learning and growing at all times. And again, it's to own up that we don't know it all. I think you actually hit the nail on the head. If you can be like that and pass it on to someone else that knows a little bit more than yourself, then you're a greater person for it.
Yeah, it's funny. I did a talk this morning, so it's just turning to the afternoon my time here in the States, and did a talk this morning. And one of the things we talked about was some of the research around asking questions. We have lots of research about this, and one of the things we know, and when we say it, it's obvious, but we always say, stay in the question. And what's less obvious is how to do that. I think your audience, that's going to be a very familiar refrain to people that follow you, Jason, which is this notion of staying in the question. We characterize that as a discipline, and then we say things like, so how do you stay in the question? Well, if you're approaching a new client or a prospect and you've done your homework, one of the default behaviors that we sellers, and I certainly made this mistake many times in my career, is one of our default behaviors is we want to quickly get to the part of the conversation where I can share stuff I know, like about my solution, or even what the homework I did about you, Jason, and your company, right? And I want to share that. And it turns out from research that one of the ways to stay in the question is to say to yourself, okay, I've done homework about Jason. I've done homework about this company. Obviously, I know my solution. What might I discover about him that I don't know? Or what might I discover about his company that I don't know? And it forces you to stay to ask the next question, and then the next question after that. And the research shows that if you do that, you are more persuasive, more likable. The academic stuff calls it impression management. People like you more, and they think you're more credible, even though you're actually saying less. You're asking more, but you're more credible because you're saying less.
Yeah.
It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot to asking a question. And an old trainer, a mentor of mine many years ago, ask a question and just be quiet. Don't overthink the question, ask the question and shut up. And then the other person will speak. And then if you're stuck, ask another question. And keep going until the metaphor is unpeeling the onion, until you get to the core and the juicy bits, which is the real sweet and tender part of it, that you can actually go, oh, right, I've uncovered that. And that's all part and parcel of your discovery. But we know now from a lot of research, and I know you're going to be in with it, is deep selling, which is you're doing your due diligence before you speak to them. You know everything about them. You've read all the articles. You've done your research online. You know everything about the situation. Again, they know about yourself. And then you can build it into that narrative that we are going to be speaking about, is ignite performance and success, and the power of stories in our sales leadership is where we're going to allude to, and I know you've written a book about it,
Yeah,
which you should be delighted for.
I am. I got so interested in this topic. My first business was a consulting firm and a software firm, and we tried to create very compelling and magnetic, there's that word again, stories
Yeah.
for our clients. And I got, in the process of doing that and building that company, I got super curious about why stories are so powerful. And I've been on a journey ever since, and I'm still learning about stories. They say that writing a book is the beginning of your learning journey and not the end. And boy, is that true. I'm still learning about storytelling. And so I wrote this book, Jason, called What's Your Story? And it looks at the tagline really is being able to tell the right story at the right time for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And, there's art and science there, which we can unpack a little bit, but it's really powerful stuff. It turns out that the research suggests that stories are our most powerful tool of influence. And I put the emphasis on most because, I think everybody in your audience knows they're powerful. I think the average human being knows they're powerful. Turns out they're your go-to tool for influence and persuasion.
Yeah.
Bar none.
Yeah. I totally agree. I've looked into it in the neuroscience and what it does and how it affects your brain. And there's lots of study behind whether it exists or not, and depends on the research that you look at, is the mirror neurons that you have in the frontal lobe of your brain. And people connect that. And if you use linguistic language like visual, auditory, and kinesthetic language, they actually step inside of your narrative and your story, and they connect so well to it. And that sort of stuff, absolutely, I'm so passionate for, and then so passionate with, because it makes an impact. And when you do it with a client or you're doing it with your team, it makes such a people just get it and they just bounce off it. And we all get it, whether you're auditory, kinesthetic, or however you view your world. We all still watch stories and we all read stories all the time. So it's so compelling.
Well, you've brought up the really interesting sort of some of the science behind storytelling, and suffice it to say here that, stories were around before there was written language, right? The software code that is called language, you said linguistics, right? We've been telling stories thousands of years before that existed, before that technology of language existed. And so, that's sort of the more like, okay, yeah, that makes sense part. Then the question becomes, and what I explore in my book and in a lot of my work and all my MBA and executive MBA courses because I teach a lot of different stuff here at Kellogg. What we explore is, okay, we all know that. What do we do now? How do we as leaders actually get the right story at the right time for the right reasons? How do we tell great stories? What does that look like? What is the art and science of telling a story such that it inspires action? Because when you say, leadership or teamwork or sales or influencing and persuading clients, what my brain hears is, okay, how do you do that? What is the trigger? What's the mechanism by which we inspire action?
Yeah, and that's probably the question about doing that, especially with your team, your sales team. And you want to get them inspired and motivated, but you want to get them into the right frame that they feel good about themselves and they want to go off and do what they should be doing in the first place. So what's a really good way of that approach in your eyes, Craig?
It starts with becoming a collector. So what I always say to people is become a collector and then eventually become a connoisseur of stories. Because in order to tell stories, you got to have them, right? So, if you say, well, tell me a great story about an entrepreneur who came to you as I spent time as an operating partner in venture capital, lots of, for years, and lots of entrepreneurs come and they try to raise money, right? They want a $3 or $5 million check. That's a lot of money, right? So what's an example of an origin story that an entrepreneur would tell? I need to be able to reach back to my quiver of arrows that's hanging on my back and pull that story out right now, not an hour from now, not after days of research, like right now. I got to be ready. So I have to collect stories. So if you're going to improve the performance of a team, you got to have team improvement stories. And, call them whatever you want. That might be a dumb label. So that's the first. And then I'm going to give you one more layer on this, and then I'll stop because, Jason, I want to go where you want to go with this conversation. But the next thing I do with leaders, with sales teams, is I say to them, okay, so you first have to become a collector. Now the question becomes, what types of stories are you collecting? In my book, I posit that there are 4 main types of stories: success, failure, fun, and legends. And legends, I think success, failure, and fun stories are obvious. Legends, is a little, a legend is the origin story of Google, or a story about Steve Jobs, or I know you're in Dublin. In Gaelic, they call this Shanachie, like the stories of the travelers, the legends of the travelers who go city to city and take the news with them. So these are all legend stories. And so any big brand, Tesco, Kraft, Apple, any big brand in the world has their legendary stories, as does any sales team. Yeah. So I would think that. So I would suggest that the people listening want to. And by the way, this is hard work. I don't shy away from making it clear to people becoming a great storyteller is hard work, because you first have to collect a lot. Then you have to figure out, okay, is that story I'm about to tell Jason, is that a success story that will motivate this team? Is it a failure story that will inspire this team to avoid those kinds of mistakes? Is it a fun story because this team is down on their luck and it's a tough economy and we just need to lighten the mood a little bit, lower the intensity? Or is it a legend that I might use to inspire them to really come together as a team and sort of fight through this difficulty?
Yeah.
So there's at least 4 types of stories that we should equip ourselves as sales professionals to be ready at any given time. Last thing I'll say, and I'll stop. I'm going to switch hats on you from sales engine person to Kellogg professor. One of the things I say to my Kellogg students is, and they always laugh at me for saying this, but I say a lot of crazy stuff here. I say, you shouldn't be able to graduate without being able to tell me 200 stories, because I know the models that we taught you in finance, and I know the theory of change that we taught you in strategy, and I know how to optimize a process that we taught you in operations, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I know all that stuff, and I know you got slide decks. Tell me the stories. If you can look me in the eye and tell me the stories, you can graduate. And my students all laugh and they say, Craig, go back to your office.
A good friend of mine that I interviewed a while back, and he always says, and he wrote a book on selling, and says, I know you know it, but why aren't you using it? And that always resonates with me. Every time I think of that, it really resonated with me. Going off on a tangent here, but I love Ted Lasso. I don't know if you've ever seen Ted Lasso, and I'm nodding your head. But he says the most amazing narratives and stories. And just to get his team, his football team, or the soccer team for the US audience there, and even the Irish audience, but he says things to get people inspired. And he looks at the team and they're all low, and he just picks them up. And whatever he says, he doesn't get it right all the time. But the stories that he does tell, it might be from the US point of view, but he's commanding it and relating it for a UK football soccer team to help them understand their position and where they actually are at that particular time. And part and parcel, and I wrote down, which is in quite a few of the books, is the hero story. And I'd love to hear about that from yourself as well.
Well, so the hero's journey is, I love it as well, Jason. The hero's journey is a construct by a guy named Joseph Campbell, a famous mythologist, that theorized that every story is a 12-step hero's journey. He articulated this in a great book called a very academic book, by the way. So I'd be careful with it because it's pretty heavy and dense, called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And I love the hero's journey because what comes out of the hero's journey. Now, Joseph Campbell was a mythologist, so this goes, again, really deep, really fast. But what I love about the hero's journey is this notion of what he calls the inmost cave, which is, and this is, by the way, what Ted Lasso does really well. So we can connect the hero's journey and mythology to Ted Lasso. What he talks about in the hero's journey is every hero reaches a point early that is called the refusal of the call. The refusal of the call is the hero literally says, I'm not doing this. I'm not going on this journey. So it's when Luke Skywalker says, yeah, this is not my fight. It's right at the beginning of the movie. So this is not my fight. This is a galactic whatever. It's not my fight.
Yeah.
And you can see this over and over and over in Ted Lasso, just across a couple of seasons, right? You see the refusal of the call. Like, I'm not doing this. And the question is that, and it's my favorite of the 12 steps, Jason, of the hero's journey, because it's the hardest.
Yeah.
And it really is, because you have to make a decision. Do I want to do this? And again, relating this to sales, one of the things that salespeople face very quickly, new leaders face this very quickly, is like, do I want to do this? Like, I have to make 200 calls this week? Really? Do I want to do that? I have to go to this conference in London or in Dublin or in Chicago, and I got to wade into the crowd with business cards and do all that thing? Yeah, you got to do that. And how do you get over the refusal, what the mythologists call the refusal of the call? It's really interesting stuff, because I do agree with Joseph Campbell that every story is in essence the hero's journey. And unpacking it can be useful to us, because now you can say, and just getting super practical for you and your audience, what you can say is, hey, I got a team that's down on its luck. What is a story that I would tell about my friend Jason, who had that same situation and was able to overcome? What did he do? And how do I weave that into the story? And I want to be careful here. What I always say to business people, which we're business people, we're in sales, is our stories have to be true. And that just makes it harder, because I'm not telling you a ghost story that I made up. I'm not telling you Star Wars. I'm telling you an actual story about an actual guy, Jason Cooper, who went through this. And that has to be true, which makes it harder for me, because I have to go collect those stories. I've got to be a collector. I've got to have a huge quiver of arrows.
Something that I read on a storybook, and I can't remember the title, but even if it's not yours, that at least you own up, but you have to use your language correctly. Said a colleague of mine, but you make it honest, so they can connect with you and they go, well, this guy is not obviously not his, but this happened to a friend of mine, and this is what happened with their sales team, and this is what they did, or however you frame it.
What's so interesting, Jason, is we do this naturally all the time. Yeah. And I get, for years and years since my book came out, I get this question like, Craig, can we appropriate other people's stories? And I say to people, you do this every day. You're just unconscious. Yeah. Of course you can, as long as you give credit. I'm a professor. I teach research all day long. Guess what that research is? Stories by other people.
Yeah.
And I just say, Allison Brooks at Harvard did this great study on question asking, and then I tell the story. And I've given her full credit, right? And we're really careful about that in academia. The half of my life that is spent at Kellogg, but we're actually careful about that in real life. We all, we say my friend Jason, and then we tell the story. I've given full credit to Jason.
Yeah, the key thing is not to be a robot. And I think when you're learning this stuff, you're probably learning from a script until you can get it perfect, or you stand in front of a mirror and you know what it's like when you do a presentation and in front of loads of people, and you practice. I spoke with the son of Zig Ziglar, Tom Ziglar, a while back, and I've spoken to him a couple of times. You probably know him. And he said his dad used to practice. And he know his stuff inside out, back to front, upside down, but he still had to practice. And for us leaders, we still have to practice to make sure that we get our pitch, our tone, our tonality correct. But one of the most important thing is our pace as well. Mm-hmm. So we get all of the emotions within it, and then we can use all the visual, the kinesthetic, and get people to jump into the picture. And that's where we want them to be.
Yeah, I'm smiling because one of my favorite moments with clients when we get sellers in the room, and it can be 1,000 people, it can be 10 people, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And they say, Craig, you're talking about scripting out and practicing your prospecting call. Like, we're talking very early sales process, the really hard stuff. Like, I'm cold calling Jason, or I'm walking up to you at an event, right? And you have no idea who I am, what my company does. the really hard stuff, because I love to explore the really hard stuff. And they're like, Craig, you talk a lot about scripting. Like, doesn't it come across as robotic when you practice it so much? And I always look forward to that question, because I always say, here's my response, Jason. I always say, well, there's a risk to that. But let me ask you a question. Think of your favorite movie. And people are like, okay, I say, you got that? Now think of your favorite actor in that favorite movie, and just think about a scene. And I always say to people, to sellers, you do know that that person is reading a script in their head in front of a camera, right? But you don't know that because you get lost in it, because their tonality is right, their emotion is right, their pacing is right, their eye contact is right, all that stuff. You know how many times they've practiced that to get that good? And people, like, when I say it like that, they're like, of course they're reading a script, right? But they're so good at it because they've practiced it so much. You don't know. You lose as soon as they open their mouth. You forget that they're reading a script in front of a camera, in front of a device that's recording them.
And that's how we can get, and that's how leaders can get, and that's how salespeople can get if they give it enough practice. Correct. Or practice in front of your partner, your wife, your kids, or your dog. Your dog will just bark at you, but that's fine as well. But you know,
good audience though. They're a good audience.
Yeah, good audience. They might run off after a little while.
I always say I practice my high stakes stories, and I'm very clear with my students and my clients and you. I don't practice every story, because every story is not high stakes. It doesn't need to be practiced. But when I need a story to land in a classroom where I know I've got this much time to influence a team of students or a group of clients, then I practice.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's definitely worth doing that. Question I always like to ask my guests: if you were interviewing you, what sort of question would you ask yourself?
How I would ask something I think about a lot, Jason. How I would ask myself, because I do this, how I'm going to get better. How are you going to continue to get better, 10 times better than you are right now at anything? And I've been fascinated over the last, bunch of years, but several years in particular. I've really dug into what's generally referred to as the new science of human performance, Anders Ericsson and peak performance. And so I always ask myself, I've been lucky to be a professor at a couple of elite business schools for 15 years. So what? What am I going to do to get better? And as a matter of fact, 2 days ago at lunch, I sat down with one of our top professors who doesn't know me that well. We've been in rooms together, but we don't know each other that well. And I asked her to coach me on some very specific teaching things, and she agreed. And so I'm super excited, and I'm going to be very uncomfortable.
That is phenomenal, and I think you learn when you're uncomfortable till you become comfortable. And I'm exactly the same. I read a lot, but I do these podcasts because I learn from some phenomenal people like yourselves. Every single person I speak to is different. And every single person I take something away as a golden nugget of knowledge. And that's what I want to give forward to every single person that listens to these podcasts. If they take one thing out of this, it's a golden gem that can actually excel them forward to learn and grow to the next step. Always, as a food for thought, what's your golden nugget? You've given lots of them, but what's your last golden nugget that you can give to us?
Yeah, it goes along with the theme, Jason, that we've been talking about. And I really appreciate being with you, because I know that you do give these golden nuggets away. And I try to do the same thing on my LinkedIn, on my named LinkedIn channel, because it's just such a great opportunity. Here's one I'll leave you with that goes along with the theme of what we've been talking about. What will you do this week that will make you uncomfortable? Brilliant. What will you do? Not terrified, but not comfortable either. Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
What will make you uncomfortable? Yeah. So I asked that professor. It was not the most comfortable conversation I've had. And I'm so glad I did it. I'm so glad, because I was like, I don't need to do this. I'm doing just great. Everything, my classes are full. It's all is well. Who wants to settle for that? Like, I want to get uncomfortable. So that's my nugget.
Oh, that'd be. I'd love to be a fly on the wall there, just to hear the conversation. I think that'd be awesome.
It's fun.
So, Greg, how can people find out more about you?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. The best way is to connect with me on LinkedIn. Follow me. It's just Craig Wortmann, as is evidenced on this. If you're watching the video, if you're not, it's WORT as in Tom, MANN, man, like man with two N's. Craig Wortmann. Follow me on LinkedIn. You can find me obviously also on the salesengine.com website or the Kellogg faculty site. So Kellogg, like the cereal company, but a different thing. The Kellogg Business School, KELLOGG. So you can find me Sales Engine, Kellogg, or obviously, please follow on LinkedIn, and we'll try to do what Jason's doing and drop some nuggets on LinkedIn for people.
Awesome. You've been phenomenal. I know it's a short time, so maybe at some other time in the near future, we'll have to jump back on again and finish the conversation.
Sure. It's a great conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again. Thank you so much.